C'est vrai que l'image qui m'était restée dans la tête, quand on revoit un film qu'on n'a plus vu depuis très longtemps, il y a des effets de se dire, tiens, on est déjà passé.
When you see a film you haven't seen in a long time, you think, say, I've been here before. Certainly the scene of the cogwheels is a scene where you have the impression you've only just been there.
When Charlie is caught in the cogwheels of the machine, it's like film winding through the gears of a camera. It's a motion picture from the age of motion pictures, which itself was the age of industry, the age of machine.
Attention foreman. Trouble on bench 5. Check on the nut pipe.
1936. Modern Times, the last great silent movie to come out of Hollywood. Modern Times, Charlie Chaplin's first talkie, but only slightly talkie. Modern Times, the last film to feature the world's most famous tramp. But
Est-ce que c'est encore le personnage de Charlot?
Is it still the same old Charlie?
Sure, he's a tramp.
He's a tramp and stays a tramp. He doesn't succeed. That's the beauty of it. In relationship to an entire cinema built on social success, on climbing the social ladder, he manages to make a film
Without that.
without that, yet he comes through. He rises above the situation, but not as a social success, but by remaining the tramp.
I agree with what you're saying. But seeing the film again, I thought, yet still in the credits, he calls him a factory worker. That's the paradox, but I think that's great having put that. Even if he doesn't succeed, he has no place there and everything works against him. In any case, he can't. But he does call him a factory worker.
That's just it. Neither the capitalism nor the communism of the period could contain him because he evades everything. He evades industrialism, which enslaves and controls the individual, domesticates him to be more productive, but he says, no, the hell with production. If I want milk, I'll stop that cow, and I'll have my milk like this. He doesn't have to produce. That's Charlie. That's where he comes into conflict with the world of industry. He dances, he glides, he roller skates, he laughs, he takes things as they come, and he eats. He eats because you never know about tomorrow. Maybe there won't be anything to eat. That's what our father was saying the other day. Charlie knows what it means to be hungry. You see that in his films. Food is everything. It's something that obsesses him. All the time. There's always food in his films, and the work that comes with food, but especially food. And it's because of food that he meets the girl, too. The gag with the bread, and the way he uses his spoon.
And when the other guy makes a move.
But he still has it, what it takes to survive. This scene with the guy next to him is David and Goliath, but it's the little guy who takes from the bigger, stronger guy. He's always in a situation where you still find the humanity. You steal, but it's human. He's a night watchman in a department store. Then his buddies come to burgle the place. So suddenly, these three burglars become people like him. They're only trying to eat. That's all. They're out of work, so they're trying to feed themselves.
in fact, in an early version of the script, one of the burglars was supposed to clean out the silverware department of the store. But Chaplin realized this suddenly made him out to be a common thief, when in fact he was just a hungry man trying to survive. The scene was shot, but cut in the final editing. Early in 1931, after the premiere of City Lights, Chaplin set off on a world tour, which was to keep him away for more than a year. In London, Paris, and Berlin, wherever he went, adoring crowds mobbed him. At the time, he was the most famous man in the world. Even if he was received by those we tend to call people in high places, Chaplin had seen depression, unemployment, and despair. He had begun to ask questions and come up with his own theories about a better redistribution of wealth. He had discussed these theories with such eminent personalities as his friend H.G. Wells, Albert Einstein, and the Mahatma Gandhi, whom he met here in London. During his meeting with Gandhi, Chaplin expounded the idea that machines, when used properly, could be a boon to mankind. But employed solely for profit, they brought only misery.
Discouragement, fear, failure. Depression haunted America.
When he got home, Chaplin realized that something had changed in America in his absence, and that the enthusiastic spirit of the pioneers was gone, as he would write later. After the prosperity of the 20s and in the wake of the Wall Street crash of '29, the Depression had set in for the long term. Unemployment had become endemic, hunger was a daily reality, the number of homeless kept rising, and the troops could readily be brought in to suppress all explosive manifestations of social unrest.
It's interesting to see these newsreels alongside scenes from the film. It's also certainly one of the great documentaries on the period.
And on the shanty towns.
On the entire period.
All the people who lived in them.
Even as he remained himself, his character. It's the same thing. This shack.
He only shows one, but that's the power of fiction.
He manages to convey the same violence as real life.
That's where the real violence is, in the way people are housed, or rather in the way they aren't housed, in the food they're forced to eat.
Le modèle T était plus qu'une automobile.
The Model T was more than an automobile. It was the symbol of an industrial revolution. Assembly line production enabled manufacturers to cut costs on all kinds of products and make them affordable to all. Minute by minute, production combated the waste of time and effort. The pieces reached the workers on conveyor belts. They were no longer left waiting uselessly. This was a great leap forward because they could regulate the production rate and maintain it at a constant speed. The battle against wasted effort was being won.
Unbridled mechanization has developed in previous years to rationalize labor at the risk of dehumanizing it. The assembly lines of the Ford auto plants were the most famous examples of this. The trouble was that with the country deep in the Depression, no one could afford anything now, so there was no need to keep the factories going. Hence, there was no hiring.
The assembly line allowed the price of the Model T to be brought down from $850 to $300.
In 1933, Chaplin published a series of articles in which he explained his view of the world, relating his travels and explaining his ideas about the economy. And, recalling a conversation he'd had with a journalist about the automobile assembly lines in Detroit, he began to work on what would become the scenario for modern times.
It's obviously very topical, having work or not, living in poverty or not, being excluded, being an outcast or not, and how the individual, the human being, becomes part of the machine, an object. Man is a cog in the wheels. He still is today, in a different way, but he still is.
And the clocking in, the way he's so much part of this machine. When the cop's chasing him, he comes in and still clocks in his card. Then later, there's his incredible act of sabotage. It's an act of rebellion.
But the way he goes crazy, the entire mechanized world
turns into a ballet.
And the human body takes over the factory.
And transforms it into something else.
It becomes a circus. The movements aren't mechanical anymore. The human body begins to exist in a way that's no longer machine-like. And when the guys are chasing him to get him to stop his ballet, he exploits the machine. There's still cogs in the machine. He yells, "The machine!" and the others run back to work. It's extraordinary.
It becomes his ally.
Yes, the machine becomes his ally so that he can continue his ballet. What's nice, too, is that little Charlie stands out in relation to the factory. Its plasticity, the grandeur of the setting, which is overwhelming and powerful. And he's so tiny. You sense that the other men are part of the backdrop. And all of a sudden, he escapes all that. Everything cracks, falls apart. Whereas in a film like Metropolis, it's the triumph of destiny, pomposity, the weight of the sets, the architecture, the Moloch, and where there are no individuals. But he walks into Metropolis, and everything collapses.
In the mind of the filmmaker, this factory never had any function. He never asked himself what it was for, what kind of stuff did it produce. Who cares? What he's interested in is the framework, the nuts and bolts. What are we producing with these nuts and bolts? Who cares?
They're producing images.
Speak a little bit. Guten Tag. Guten Tag. All right. Thank you very much.
That day in Vienna, in March 1931, Charlie Chaplin, for the first time, spoke in front of a sound camera. Somewhat tense, and in German, but his voice was heard.
Thank you very much.
Chaplin had long had a problematic relationship with the human voice on film. He expressed himself better with his body than with his words. In the early days of talkies, he gave this innovation 6 months at best. He would be the last to make silent films in Hollywood. As early as City Lights, he devised a highly personal way of using images, sound effects, and music, dispensing with dialogue altogether. But when he came to modern times, he was aware that he couldn't keep the talking film at bay much longer, so he attempted to make a complete dialogue film. He had done some voice tests and even shot a scene with dialogue in the office of the prison warden, but the experience left him unconvinced, and he quickly gave it up. In modern times, the characters would continue to communicate through intertitles, like in the days of silent movies. As his daily production records show, Chaplin continued to have his cameras turn at 18 frames a second, and even at 16. Since the film was silent, he was under no obligation to film at sound speed, 24 frames a second. This way, Chaplin could give whatever rhythm he wanted to his scenes, speeding them up more or less depending on the needs of the action. Chaplin also took liberties with his soundtrack, selecting the sounds he wanted to bring out.
He plays on it like
sparks.
a musical score. It's part of a musical score.
A musical score that stands in for dialogue, associating each of the main characters with a specific musical instrument.
Quit stalling. Get back to work.
The only voices we hear in the finished film are those filtered through machines. The orders of the factory boss, the spoken instruction manual for the feeding machine, the radio.
Sales Talk Transcription Company Incorporated. Your speaker, the mechanical salesman. Local news. A pardon was granted to the prisoner who so recently thwarted the attempted city jailbreak. Sheriff Cooler will inform the prisoner of the good news sometime today.
Signora Pilacina, voulez-vous la taximeter? Le zionter sous la cita. Tula wa.
But then came the great moment. We finally hear Chaplin's own voice at the very end of the film, but singing gibberish, because Chaplin remains first and foremost a mime. He suggests that even without the lyrics, we can just as easily follow the story he's singing to the music of the popular French song Titine. He had considered various ways of expressing himself as the tramp, such as speaking in monosyllables or simply mumbling. Chaplin's great fear was that by talking, he would become just one more comedian.
J'ai notre seule mine, j'ai notre seule consigne. Je laisse trop sa vite, je la tasse à
Principal photography lasted for the better part of a year without any major incidents, from October 11th, 1934 to August 30th, 1935. An empty lot was rented for the major street sets while the factory and department store sets were built at the Chaplin studios. Chaplin edited the film as he shot, doing any number of retakes, as he had always done, with scenes that had not fully satisfied him. And as Chaplin was his own boss, whenever he had a cold or he wasn't satisfied with a set or an actor, production was suspended. Shooting would often continue well into the night, but Chaplin usually spent weekends on his yacht, the Panacea, with a woman who had been his companion for almost 3 years now, Paulette Godard.
Toutes les femmes dans le film, on peut pas dire qu'elles soient très sympathiques.
The women in the film aren't very nice. They're cold, withdrawn.
They're withdrawn.
Gurgling sounds. And they're mean. The woman who says she's the one.
And in the prison, too, the Chaplin's wife.
Then there's this woman. You feel that the man filming her is in love with her. From the very first shot. Every time she reappears, every time she opens a scene, there's always a close-up. In different roles, in different characters. Every time.
In June 1932, shortly after his return home from his world trip, Chaplin had met a young divorcee, Paulette Godard, who had already played some bit parts in movies. She was 20, he was 43. She was to be his companion for the next decade. They were married in 1936. She was his screen partner in 2 films, Modern Times and The Great Dictator, a partner who, for the first time, would be his equal in the scenario and almost in the credits.
Their first encounter is beautiful, too, with the stolen bread.
Chance.
It's a shock. The encounter with the woman is an accident.
She appears each time as a different character. When she's in the department store acting like a society lady, then as a dancer, and her very first appearance with the knife between her teeth.
Just like conservatives imagine communists, and she shares things when necessary. She gives bananas to the children. I also love the moment when Paulette Godard, having stolen and shared things like Robin Hood, turns around. There's a guy chasing her and she turns around. She taunts him. It's quite an affront to the rich and powerful.
She changes him. In the film, the factory worker, Charlie Chaplin, is all alone, all the time. The others are like obstacles, adversaries, people he has to outwit and fight with. The first time he does anything for someone else is at the end of the film, when they came to take her to the orphanage. It's the first time he does something for another person. She becomes a partner, another person. And he realizes he's not alone, that there's someone else.
Why is that? In my opinion, it's because they're no longer involved with work. They're in a music hall. That's Charlie's real homeland.
The music hall is also a workplace.
Yes, but only there do they keep him. Charlie can't work. He's a tramp, and he's on stage, and he makes us laugh. Because he's never where he should be. He's never in his place. He's the black sheep. In fact, the first shot of the film is of sheep. And in the middle, there's a black sheep. That's Charlie. And here in the music hall, he's at home. He can make mistakes, and he can be out of it. But that's how he makes us laugh. He's at home.
He doesn't realize that he makes people laugh, and that he's good at it. She's the one who tells him how good he is. This film is also a marvelous love story.
But it's a love story where the woman doesn't confine him to a middle-class home. There's a scene where he fantasizes. They're sitting together under a tree in front of a little house, And he says to her, "What if we had our own little home too?" And Charlie fantasizes it. I think he's fantasizing about paradise. His dream is about having enough to eat. He even gives that famous backward kick of his to a fruit that he's just plucked. Then a cow appears. It's like in a society of abundance. This isn't a middle-class house. We're in a paradise. And they're thrown out of paradise. There by the tree, in the grass by a cop, which is typical of Charlie. He doesn't get along with cops. He doesn't like them, and the feeling's mutual. He's always suspect number one. He doesn't care. He doesn't want the shelter of a cozy home. He doesn't care. He's still the tramp.
Yes, and he gets by.
And he gets by.
With whatever means he has.
He's beyond redemption.
But he doesn't end up alone.
He doesn't end up alone.
That's what's great.
Chaplin had originally conceived a very different ending for his film. After being separated from her, the tramp again runs into the gamine, who has in the meantime become a nun. He realizes that he can't take her with him, and after remembering her as he had first known her, the tramp sets off down the road, alone as always. But no, this time Chaplin decided that for once the tramp wouldn't set off down the road alone, as he always had. The scene with the nun was shot, but not edited. Instead, it was replaced by the famous final image of the tramp and the gamine going down the road together toward the horizon of a future we imagine will be better.
There are other films that finish like this, where one character says to another, "The struggle continues," or "Life goes on," and it comes across as contrived.
But not here.
But here, they're both together, and the girl seems at a loss.
She's had enough.
She's had enough, and then life gets the upper hand again, and the machine gets going. What's funny is the way he gives her the energy to get on her feet. She says, "Let's go," and they get up and go. Yes, but there are two of them. They finish the film together. It's a first for Chaplin. They end the film as two tramps. And their home is the music hall, the stage, the movies.
Survival is a theme you're familiar with?
Oui. Enfin, qu'on a exploré, oui.
Yes, we've explored it. With some of our characters, among others, Rosetta. I think that Rosetta is the character closest to a situation of material survival. Having something to eat is a real problem, a problem that crops up daily.
Rosetta is an outcast, like Charlie.
She's not a tramp.
She's an outcast, but she absolutely wants to get into society and be like everyone else. But with Charlie, it's not the same thing. He plays on the fact that he's on the outside in order to get by and survive. Whereas with her, if she's on the outside, she feels she's going to die.
And yet he wants to get in. And we know that he can't.
But Rosetta doesn't have Charlie's sense of humor.
That? No.
Rosetta is on edge. She's always saying, "I'm gonna die, help me, help me." And when someone helps her, she doesn't even realize he's helping her. She thinks he's her enemy. She's so involved in her own thing. She sees everything skewered.
You can't say it's a chock full of gags.
But at the end, there are two people together.
Two people together.
They're together, just like in Rosetta. There is something in common between what we tried to do and this great film of Chaplin's. It's something else, but the guy says to her, "Come on."
We gotta go on.
He helps her up, and then she looks at him for the first time. She had never looked at him.